Hey there, welcome back to 16 Stops a Podcast. My name is Josh, and I'm here with Brandon.
What's up?
And today in episode 21, we're going to discuss whether or not we've reached camera enlightenment. Seems like Brandon already has.
I think we have. We will be transfigured soon, Josh.
Okay. Well, Brandon, I'm so excited to get some more episodes out for everybody because this has been a long time that we took a break. We talked about that all in the last episode, but we've actually learned a lot about cameras and ourselves and our needs over the last 7 months, and piggybacking onto all of our experience over several years before that. So it's what we're going to talk about throughout this video. But we have some big news, Brandon.
We do.
And most of you have heard us talk about how, especially in the last episode where we've been sort of putting this lower on our priority list because we don't make money doing this, but we do have a sponsor and we are so excited for so many reasons.
Oh, this is a big one.
Yeah, so B&H Photo is sponsoring the podcast and they've agreed to help us out with several episodes. I am very grateful for my relationship with B&H, not only as a customer, because I know most of what I buy is from B&H, I think for you too, Brandon. And
Samesies.
They've been so supportive of my channel, letting me borrow gear, and I'm working on some other projects with them, and they've just been absolutely incredible. So as for us to just say thank you to B&H for making this possible and sort of motivating us to do more episodes and all that stuff. But also, for all of you out there watching, please go check out B&H Photo. We'll put links in the description for the gear that we use to record the podcast, and then if there's any other gear that we use that we're going to talk about in the episode, please go check that out. They don't cost you anything. We haven't put any affiliate links in any of our videos before. So,
I mean, it's obviously a great sponsor if, after all of the many times we've said things to not get a sponsor, I think it's pretty awesome of B&H to be like, yes, let's roll the dice on these two wackos and see what happens.
I agree, and I know that we had talked so many times about like we'd rip a company and like, you know, not like a retailer, but like a manufacturing company or product company, and then we're like, we're never getting sponsors. But B&H likes what we're doing, so we really appreciate them. And like
Thanks,
I said,
B&H.
they've been so supportive of my channel over the last year and change as well. So I really can't thank them enough. Anyways, so with that in mind, let's start talking about some gear and some stuff that's happened. I think the first thing to discuss, Brandon, is we're going to be talking both about gear that we use for work and for personal stuff or for fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's going to be kind of mixed in with the discussion here. But Brandon, would you say there's a lot of discussion going on the internet in the camera space right now that's sort of like camera gear, anything in the last couple years is good enough. Do you sort of agree with that statement?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it depends on the situation, but my personal thought is, at least from an image quality standpoint, everything is so good, and it does look kind of the same, that other things start to matter more than just image quality. And that's kind of what got this discussion rolling.
Yeah, Brandon and I talk about gear all the time because we're like, hey, I just bought this. Hey, I just sold this. And we got all excited and we're like, hey, does this thing do this? Does this thing do that? And I think we came to the discussion and the conclusion where we're like, hey, pretty much most of the cameras in the last few years, like after we've learned a lot more about our trade, like how we approach our work and color grading and editing photos and all this stuff, like we can kind of make any camera look good enough for most situations.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of experience with different camera brands. I've shot on pretty much everything at this point, video-wise. I know, Brandon, you have too. Do you want to talk about some of those situations that you've gone through, like with different brands and stuff like that?
For sure. And I would like to specify one of the reasons why we have, or at least my personal reason. I think, I haven't been doing this that long. And it's going to take a little longer than a few months for me to settle in and discover what I really want out of a camera. And I'm very fortunate that I'm in the position that I can buy and sell frequently enough to get exposed to a ton of different manufacturers and go, oh, this is what I really appreciate from so-and-so, and this is what I really appreciate from that brand. And I've just been whittling down what feels best and gives me the best experience that I can. And so, it started with Canon with a little Canon M50, And then from there, I went to the Fuji system to get a couple of XT3s and XT30 and XS10. And I really liked what Fuji was doing. But then I wanted like full frame, and I went to Canon, and I had Canon for a while. And then I started getting into cinema cameras, and I had a Black Magic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro, and then the C70, and then a Komodo. And so it's just been kind of an evolution. And because it's been kind of this ramp up, and I guess you would say cost, image quality, features, I think I have a little more understanding, at least personally, when I make that statement. Like, I think IQ is all pretty good. You know, what does it come down to for you? I think that's where I'm approaching this, because in the short time that I've been doing this, I've had my hands on quite a few different systems, different cameras, both hybrid and cinema. And that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. And I also want to preface this by saying that Brandon really is a hybrid shooter. Brandon does a lot of photography, but also videography work and content creation for his YouTube channel. So versus myself, I really just do video stuff. So for me, a lot of my experience has been through that world as well. So it's a little bit different. But my journey was, you know, way back in the day, I had shot film for photography. I wasn't like super serious about it. I did have a couple of digital cameras earlier, you know, throughout the decades of being an adult. But with video, when I started my farming channel, I started with my phone, and then I bought a Canon M50, which I know we've talked about before. I went through a lot of the Canon cameras, and then made a jump to buying Sony in 2020 with the A7S III, and I had an A7 III, and there was a lot of those. I've been back and forth between Canon and Sony over the last 4 years, but I've also mixed in every other brand for video pretty much, I think, other than Olympus, Blackmagic, Fuji, Red, Lumix. I even tried to use a Leica, but I did not get along with that for video. But that's it was very short. I wouldn't even say that counts. And part of the reason that I have been so interested in doing the channel that I do is because I've always been interested in trying out different cameras. Like, I was constantly switching up cameras on the farming channel. I was buying and selling cameras, so that's why sort of a lot of this came to be. But in that journey, you start to realize what's important to you and what's not important to you, and what you can get away with and that sort of stuff. And I do really believe that in the last few years, as long as you pay a little bit of money for a camera, you can kind of do a lot with it. I'm even really impressed with the Osmo Pocket 3 and how good that thing can look.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah. So let's talk about what matters most to us. You brought up image quality. I do want to talk about image quality. I think we are getting to a point where there's little nuances that we're going to like nerd out about and argue about.
For sure.
And we're talking rolling shutter, dynamic range, the highlight roll off, you know, like these things that we're going to like nerd out about. But like image quality is not the most important thing, Brandon.
I don't think it is. And I think, interestingly, the nuances between photo and video are different. I think it's a lot easier to spot the nuances in video, whereas with photo, it seems like most of the sensors out there in full frame land are shooting either 14 or 15 bit. And it's really hard to delineate between those, you know? And it's really hard to delineate between an APS-C and a full frame, or a full frame and a medium format. But that's kind of where the differences lie. I think it is interesting to see like the differences in texture. I don't think texture gets talked a lot about in image quality. It's just colors or dynamic range, but I do think texture is a part of it. But I think in video, when you're talking about dynamic range and highlight roll off and those subtleties, I think they're a lot more easy to spot in video.
That's interesting. Do you think it's just because the people that are using them and how we're, manipulating footage and stuff like that? Or do you think there's just a difference in these cameras between because like in a lot of the mirrorless cameras, you can shoot like 14-bit photo, but you can only shoot 10-bit video, for example.
Yeah, I think that is a big part of it. Even though I said that, I don't really have a great way right now to articulate why that is. I just do see the differences. Like if I looked at video, it'd probably be easier for me to pick those things apart than a photo. I think your level of if you gave me the highest end, Canon sensor and a medium end whatever, so Nikon or whatever, it's just you can make photos really look really similar compared to like video. I think there's a lot more wiggle room with video than there is photo. Maybe the photographers are going to hate me for that, but that's kind of where like this discussion came for me, because I'm way more into photography than I am videography right now. And I've shot on a whole bunch of stuff and I've went, all of this kind of looks the same. And so for me, build quality and the way the camera responds to me and how it feels and those sorts of things mattered way more than image quality does. However, when I'm shooting video, things like autofocus and highlight roll-off and dynamic range and sound quality, like all of those play a bigger part in what matters to me than in photo, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what we're going to talk about is our experience, and that's really what we need. Like, we're not saying that this stuff matters, is right? So, like, autofocus, for example, in photography, like, Brandon, you shoot a lot on manual focus lenses for photography.
Yeah, even, like, over the weekend, it was in Manhattan Beach, and I was shooting sports, and I shot it all manual focus. I shot with a rangefinder, which doesn't even have IBIS. It's purely manual focus, and that's not the easiest thing to focus, but I actually used a 24-90, which is an autofocus lens, and I put it on manual focus. And it was honestly just easier for me to camp and shoot that way, and I enjoyed it more than relying on autofocus.
Okay. So in terms of image quality, it sounds like there's some things that are sort of intangible that you look for. Like you talked about texture, which I think is really hard to be analytical about, especially from someone who does analyze cameras on a technical level. But I think there's like color depth and, sort of that sort of stuff that it's hard to measure. And even dynamic range, which I'm going to be diving a lot more deeply into on my channel, is not super objective, in my opinion. You can measure it in certain ways, but you also have to look at the image and say, like, look at the highlights here, look at the shot, like, which one looks better? And I think a lot of us forget about, like, the actual image versus, like, crunching numbers and this thing is better than this thing and that sort of stuff. I do want to talk for a few moments about the user experience, and you did just bring this up, Brandon, but, like, this is something that you have talked about with me for years now. It has been super important to, and I first was like, yeah, whatever, Brandon's being ridiculous. And then all of a sudden I looked down at my cameras and I thought about what you had and I was like, oh my God, we have like very similar camera situations. And that stuff has become more important to me personally. So we're talking about the ergonomics, how the camera like actually physically feels in your hand, the thought that when you see the camera on the table, you have to pick it up when you walk by it and just like want to go shoot with it. Can you talk about that importance for you, Brandon? Because I know that's like, it's been wearing off on me, so.
Yeah. I've always been this kind of person, cameras aside, that the look of something draws me in, right? Whether that's shoes or tech or whatever. Hell, I don't know, like cabinets. I just like stuff to look cool and it's got to resonate with me. But when it came to cameras, then it also had to deal with like the simple, like, how does the shutter feel? Does the shutter make me feel like I'm doing something? Or is it just some cold, mechanical click? I remember walking into Priceline, which is like my local picture store, and I've been really toying around with the idea of getting in a medium format. They had the new GFX 100 Mark II. And I'm like, man, that camera, now that's like peak camera when it comes to photography. Medium format, 100 megapixels, big old sensor, 16-bit color, crazy autofocus, stay, you name it. Grab the camera, pick it up, take 2 photos, and I was like, nope. That's all it took. And I'm just like, I understand that this is a crazy camera, but I also know that no matter how good it is, in 6 months, if I really don't like shooting it, like what's the point? And that was just from the like shutter. That just did not make me feel good. So I have cameras, like my personal camera choices, I know they're gonna shoot an excellent photo. And they have great specs, and sometimes I have to work around those specs. I have to respect what they are good at and know what they are good at and not try to put them in environments that they're not meant to be in anyway. But the feedback that they give me and the way I interact with the camera makes me feel so good. And so because I'm not shooting like my life depends upon it and my family depends upon the money, I'm doing more or less this for just me and my own personal satisfaction. I can grab cameras and shoot them that just make me feel good. And that's so important. And I think if I had to shoot work stuff, obviously I'm gonna prioritize the end result and how easy it is to make, if I'm frustrated or not, I wanna have like an easy experience. That experience matters. But if it's just personally, I just want the thing that makes me feel good when I shoot it.
And I think there's been a lot of cameras that have been designed over the last few years to sort of go that direction too. You see cameras like, Fuji's always made these cameras that have physical dials that people really enjoy, the tactile experience. Even like Nikon, like the ZF that came out last year, like has that sort of tactile feel to it, like gives you that sort of vintage vibe that like you connect with the camera more. I think there is a lot of that for sure. You brought up a lot of good points in that, Brandon. I think one thing was like if you're using this for work versus for fun, I think there's a little bit of a difference there, because if you need like crazy, like let's say you're shooting high action sports or something and you need 30 frames, 40 frames per second because you're doing something and you need that exact moment, that might dictate like the camera that you choose. Is that what you're saying?
For sure.
But like, okay.
Yeah. Like I said, I just did this huge volleyball tournament, Manhattan Beach Open, and I wanted to film it because it's part of another video that I'm doing on my main channel. And I took the Leica SL2 because I know it could pull great double duty as a photo video camera. I took my M11P because that's the camera I'm trying to practice on right now. That's like this crazy visceral experience. It's not like anything else. But I also took the Panasonic S5. And I took the Panasonic the S5 II for a very specific reason, because I could flip the screen out and I could rely on the autofocus. And I was like, the first day that we were competing, I would also be competing. I wasn't going to have time to be behind the lens filming everybody else. It was like a couple of quick clips and I needed it to just get those quick clips. I needed fast, reliable autofocus, great audio, and that flip screen. So I used it for like 20 minutes, but I knew it would do the job. Then the next day, when I knew I wouldn't be in front of the camera at all, I'd just be behind, Leica SL2 all the way. I hands down much prefer to shoot on it. Everything about it, I can shoot photos and videos, and I love it. But there's no way I would try to vlog with that camera and get some of the quick clips that I got, because I knew its limitations,
So I think that's the sort of delineation here is like if you're doing something for a client or even for content creation, because that counts as like work to me, is like if I'm recording something for my YouTube channel, that's what I'm doing right now for work. So for me, it has to hit certain criteria that we need, like if it's a frame rate, codec, frames per second in photography, autofocus, like there's stuff like that. Now, I've been really struggling personally with going out and shooting just for the fun of it. Usually I'm like, well, I'll go out and shoot this sunset, but like I really need that footage for this lens review video or whatever. But I do think that when I pick up a camera, I've been putting more emphasis on the physical nature of the camera and talking more about how it feels, how it operates, the buttons, the dials, the grip, that sort of stuff. There's definitely some cameras where I'm like, love this camera, great image quality, but like I don't like using it. And so there are other options out there. I also feel like some cameras have, I don't know how to describe this, but like have a soul and some don't, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it totally does. And it's not to like knock on any brand in particular, but where I'm at right now is I want to be more a part of the process. And sometimes those cameras that are so do everything for you, I feel like I'm not. And I don't like that. And so even though they're insanely good cameras, not only am I not being a part of that process and enjoying it, but the plasticky feel where it feels like it just went on a conveyor belt and nobody really cared about it. It's like it just does the thing and they just kind of slapped it together. I don't know. I don't like that. Like I want something it's different. Like you said, it's kind of hard to explain, but I feel like the cameras I have soul. And maybe that's why I have them, because when I pick them up and I shoot with them, I'm like, there's something about this camera that I love. But like my Canon R5, great camera, but no soul for me. That camera did not have any soul. And you might not think, like the people watching out there, they could be like, what the hell are you talking? I totally get it. Like, I think that's an important point, is like this weird camera that I'm saying that you absolutely love and that just you love shooting. It can be any camera. It doesn't have to be Fuji. It can be any camera. But for me, those are the cameras that I gravitate to. And the R5 was not one of them.
I was going to say, as you were saying, that this is like whatever makes you feel good. Like it could be a Sony camera, it could be a Fuji camera, it could be a Leica, it could be a Red, like whatever. Like there's certain cameras that you pick it up and you're like, this feels great. I love the image that comes out of it. It's what you're looking for. You enjoy the experience, because when you enjoy the experience, I think you do create better work for yourself, like for your hobby, taking pictures of your family, or for professional work as well. I think that's important. And I think, that gets often overlooked, I think, because everyone's just talking about specs all the time. And I had this discussion with someone specifically, but this has come up several times about like, well, if you think the image quality is so great in this camera, why don't you use this for every situation? Yeah. And it's like, well, right tool for the right job, right? Like, just because like maybe a Red or a Blackmagic or whatever has like the best image quality in video for this application, it doesn't mean that I need autofocus, I need stabilization, I need a small form factor, I need better battery life, and maybe I'll take a 5% hit on image quality to make my whole day go easier and maybe actually get shots that I wouldn't normally get.
I ran into this issue a lot because my need for it to feel good and for me to enjoy what I'm doing, I had to really put that, in the back seat when I would go shoot a client gig. I'd go to a client gig and I'm like, no, you need to take the camera that's going to get the job done and cause you the least amount of stress possible, because your stress will create stress for everybody around you. It's going to make for a worse shoot. Like you need to have no stress. So you need real fast autofocus. It's got to be one of the soulless cameras that you have that do it. Like my Leica SL, my Leica Q2 is not going to be that thing. Like those are fun. Bring those just in case you get everything and you have like some extra time to go get the shots that you want. But I'd be like, okay, I'm taking the R5C because I know this will do everything I need it to do with zero stress. I'm just not going to enjoy that as much as I would another camera, but I got to like put that on the back burner because the job's got to get done.
I remember the exact conversation I had with you, because you were like, I'm going to take my KX to this gig. And I was like, cool, man. It's going to take you like way long. And you came back, you're like, I need a damn mirrorless camera. Like, just give me a mirrorless camera and a gimbal. We get this job done like so fast. And I'm like, I mean, there's a time and place for all this stuff. What about, so when you're thinking about what matters, man, we talked about image quality. We talked about specs that you may need. What about the brand awareness with clients? I think to some people, it may not matter so much in our lives, but if you show up on set with, let's say, a Red or an Ari or whatever, or you show up with your Sony mirrorless camera, does that, I mean, it hasn't happened in my life yet, but like that is important for some situations.
Well, it has happened in your life, Josh, because I was also on that gig. I mean, both of us got hired to do this like fan Star Trek thing.
That's true.
Because we both owned Red Komodos, and that's what they used first. So part of it was we knew the DP, and the DP liked us. We're all friends, and we wanted to hang out. But it was also, you guys also have the equipment that we want to use for this next gig.
So it was easier to hire us for that gig because we brought the cameras.
It sure was. And I did 2 more big set gigs like that, commercials, one for like a big light bar KC. I got hired simply because I had the KX. It was like, we really want that camera. We're going to rent it out and we'll hire you at the same time. So I've had gigs, almost all my big gigs with the KX came because they already knew I had the KX. It wasn't like, we want to hire you and then you can just shoot our own thing. That like really hasn't happened. It has for BTS stuff, but that's a little different. But as far as like every other job I've been on, like when I was shooting content for a restaurant here in town, they didn't care. They just wanted it to look good and be a cool video. And I could have done that on the $1,400 camera, and I did it on the $10,000 camera. So,
yeah, and just a reminder for everyone watching, don't buy a camera thinking you're going to get hired for, like, don't go buy a KX thinking you're going to get jobs offered to you. That's not, like, what we're saying here. But there are some situations where you may get hired because you have a certain camera or they need a certain deliverable. Like, let's say you're working in an area where they need, most of the time they're asking for 6K R3D. So it's like, okay, well, that's what they need delivered, so you have to have one of those cameras or you have to rent it or whatever.
Yeah.
And to piggyback on your conversation, a lot of the work I was doing last year, my client work, I was doing real estate stuff. My client never asked what camera I was shooting on. I don't think he even ever saw me holding my camera. He literally didn't, like, because he wasn't on the jobs, you know what I mean? And he was like happy with the image quality. So a lot of it is like what works for you, as long as you can deliver an image that people like. So how about when you're deciding on camera brands? I don't want to get into specifics about brands, but when you're deciding between, do I buy this brand or that brand, does the company itself matter to you in terms of how they market their cameras, their customer service, how they interact with creatives and creators, like stuff like that? Does that factor in at all when you're making purchase decisions?
I don't know if it really does. You know, I have a lot of Leica now, and I have 2 Reds. And those are very polarizing companies. But when I bought those cameras, I don't think I ever, well, the very first Red, I've been very honest about this. When I bought my first Red, the Red Komodo, the OG, I bought it because of the name. I was like, holy shit, I got a Red now. Like, you know, clout. I've totally chased the clout, as the kids say. But I loved the camera so much. I loved everything about it. When it came to Leica, it was not that the heritage of Leica mattered. The fact that Leica does more than probably any other camera brand to promote photographers did not also register. It wasn't on the radar when I bought it. I went, this camera makes a great image, and I love the way it feels. I love how well it's built. I like what they're offering. That was all that was on my radar. Even now that I've had them, I still don't really think about, well, it's Leica and it's been around for nearly 100 years and yada, yada, yada. That stuff doesn't really matter to me so much. Customer service, for sure. Absolutely. Like, you want to burn a bridge real fast, let people know that you don't give a shit about them, right? So I've also bought camera brands where they've kind of, I don't want to, maybe this is the wrong way to say it, but they've bought my loyalty because they've gone above and beyond when I've had issues to treat me really well. And Red, despite your history, like you watching out there, despite the viewer's history with a camera brand, if it is Red and Leica, mine has been that they've gone above and beyond to make things right if something were wrong. And that's definitely like, hey, like you're buying my loyalty. Like, if you're going to treat me like that, because I've had other brands where you're just a number. Like, they don't care, you know? Like, you're going to get taken care of if you bought the extra care pack thing or something.
There's also, so your experience having like worked with brand or like interacted with these companies will help you decide on if you want to buy another one of their cameras or maybe go somewhere else.
Absolutely.
There's also, I think, some people don't like I brought this up about like how companies are marketing their stuff or maybe how they interact with their customers in terms of firmware updates or third-party lenses or so.
Yeah, business practices. Like, you're going to look at a business practice and be like, hey, that's either cool or not cool.
Right. Crippling their cameras, whatever, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't have to even name the names of these companies. You guys know who we're talking about. All right, so those are kind of the things that we use to make our decisions. And I kind of want to wrap up that section by saying that it's interesting, like going back a few minutes, that we're kind of using cameras sometimes that are more challenging to use. And I find myself doing that more often, Brandon, where I'm using more manual focus now, even though I have cameras that have great autofocus, or I'm using cameras that don't have stabilization when I could get one that does have stabilization.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing where when you have all the features, then you kind of want less features sometimes. I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing.
I know that I bet a lot of people are like this. We buy a camera with a ton of features and we probably only use 20% of them anyway.
Truth.
But like I went and shot this volleyball tournament on a purely manual camera, right? There's no stave, 60 megapixels, like manual focus, everything, rangefinder with a patch. And I tried to shoot sports. And I will say that while maybe none of the photos are any better than anything I could have gotten with the quick hybrid camera, the sense of pride knowing that I did everything to get that photo was higher. And that's really cool. Like, I don't care what anybody else thinks about the photo. It's me. I'm the one shooting the photo and getting the experience out of it. And so even though I'm not yet skilled enough to now take that camera and make some really awesome photos with it that I probably can't get otherwise, being incredibly challenged was really rewarding. That hasn't happened in a long time. It felt like I was just starting over. And I'm like, oh, this is really cool. This is a really cool experience. And getting to share that with other friends that came to the beach that are also, you know, like us, like camera nerds, and they had never shot on one. They were like, whoa, this is crazy. So yeah, I love it right now.
I think there is something to that about there being a little bit of a challenge with the camera sometimes. And I can't really explain why, but I do feel like it forces your creativity a little bit and kind of gets you to hyper focus a little bit more. It kind of makes it more fun in some ways too, when it's just like hold up the camera, push the button. It's like, I don't know. I mean, there's a time and place for that too, but you have to, all right. Look, I want to talk about sort of gear acquisition syndrome for a few minutes, gas. And
Yeah.
Brandon, we all do. I am just as guilty as Brandon is and everyone else watching this because you guys love cameras too. Brandon, why do we keep buying new cameras if we're sort of at the point where all these cameras are pretty good, we can get our work done, we have fun with them? Like, why are we constantly looking at new cameras? Why do you think that is?
Well, scientifically, we probably get a nice little dopamine hit when we do buy one.
Truth.
So it would probably be fair to say we're probably addicted to that caffeine, or not that caffeine, that dopamine hit. Also, it's just fun to buy like gear. It's fun. It's fun to use it. Unfortunately, it's a Band-Aid, right? It's not like actually filling the deep hole that is in us, that is insecurity for not being very good at what we do.
We don't need to go there, just keep talking.
That's definitely how I feel about it. But as I said, like, I love gear and I want to try new things. I've tried enough now that I know what I don't like, and like I'm narrowing the field of what interests me. So when all these new cameras come out, I can very quickly go, oh, I like that, I don't like that. I wouldn't even bother with this type of system. That's how I feel personally about me buying new cameras. And I'm actually kind of at a point where I'm like, I don't know if I would buy anything else. For me, it would be, I really was hoping the SL3 would be that thing that gives me the work flow, like the work reliability, all the autofocus, all those things that I want for a work job, but with the satisfaction of using my Leica. You know what I mean? If I could have brought those two together, that would have been like my ultimate camera. Unfortunately, it wasn't. So I guess I'm still looking for that thing. I don't know if I'll ever find it. I'm sure at some point maybe the Leica SL5 can be it. But other than that, I'm pretty caught up on gear. That being said, I'll probably buy more lenses, but that's like a different thing.
Yeah. So I think for me too is my needs keep changing, and so I'm constantly like, oh well, this thing would be better for that thing, or I'll get I'll have there's no perfect camera, And I'll get a camera and I'll be hyper focused about one little thing that I'm like, oh, if this camera just did this, and then I go try this other thing, and I'm like, well, this is missing those 3 things, and you just kind of go round and round and round. Like,
guys,
how many times like,
if I could like share with you how many times. So the greatest thing about Josh is he's so thorough. He's so thorough. That's why you guys love his channel. He's incredibly thorough. The worst thing about Josh is he's so incredibly thorough. And I feel bad for him.
We were going to make a whole episode about this, weren't we?
Yeah. I feel bad for Josh. Me and Josh are very different. I'm very much like, this camera does 400 things wrong, but if it does 2 or 3 things right that I really like, then I just go with it.
You've even said like, oh, that camera looks dope, I'm buying it. I'll figure out if it works later.
I've literally looked at a camera and go, oh my God, that's gorgeous, I'm buying it. Whereas Josh will take a camera that does just about everything perfectly right, and he'll be like, it doesn't do this. And he's just like, I'm out.
So this is a blessing and a curse because like I love the technical aspects of the cameras. I'm absolutely amazed by them. I'm a huge nerd. My background in engineering and math and all that stuff like comes into this when I'm testing cameras. The problem, which I thought we were gonna make a whole episode about this. I don't know if we did talk on the podcast.
You
but
just can't be blissfully unaware. And it sucks.
Well, the problem is, once I review a camera, I find everything that's wrong with it. And so sometimes when I buy a camera, I don't want to review it because I don't want to find all the little stupid things in the camera because then it's ruined in my head.
Yeah. Don't meet your idol. It's one of those things. But with a camera.
Pretty much. But for me personally, I've really, I go through this period, and I think you do too, Brandon, where we like, what am I doing with all this crap? And you sell all these cameras and lenses, and then you come down to a little bit, and then you're like, okay, what do I really need right now? And then you sort of get a couple more things. I don't really need very much for what I'm doing right now, and often I'll like look at what's out there, or when a new camera comes out, I'm like, does this beat the camera that I have? Does this do something better? Is it, I'm always after better image quality, even though like a lot of the work I'm doing is fairly simple, but I really like nerding out on that stuff. But a lot of times it's better workflow, faster cameras, reliability, maybe just learn some new stuff when you get to play with a new camera. Like I'm now tested pretty much every brand. Like I just reviewed like 3 Nikon cameras.
Yeah.
And I think that I personally gain a lot by using all these different brands. And it's not just to dictate which cameras I want to purchase for myself or which cameras I want to use on a daily basis. But I think having experience with different brands, if it's using your friend's camera or renting a camera for a gig, or however you can do this, I think it sort of opens your brain to like the camera matters a little bit less than you think it does a lot of the times. I think you become a better videographer, cinematographer, photographer if you have experience with multiple brands, because you don't look at it through the same box all the time and you're kind of like using general techniques all the time. Is that something that you found by like working through all these different brands where you're just like, oh, I can manipulate this camera to make it look a certain way?
For sure, and if nothing else, it just gives me more confidence that if somebody's hiring me and they're not hiring me and my camera, I'm going to be able to figure it out pretty darn quickly. Yeah. Which has happened, and great. I think the only downfall from experimenting that much is it's kind of like the, what's the saying? Don't fear the man who's practiced 10,000 different kicks. Fear the man that's practiced one kick 10,000 times, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I've never heard that one, though.
If you're jumping around so much, you really can't dedicate. I do think, at least, I think a lot more in photography terms than I do video. And I think it's really hard to master your craft when you're bouncing around a ton. I think technical mastery of that one camera is very important. I think it is a pretty important part of being a great photographer. And so if I'm jumping from camera to camera, it's harder to do that. It's going to take me longer to do that. I would probably a better photographer if I had bought one camera 4 years ago and 1 or 2 lenses and did not change. I believe that to be true. I'm okay with that not happening.
I agree with that, and I think there's issues when you jump around like we're talking about here, but also, I do want to talk about that, but also changing systems, in that if you're on one system all the time and then you buy another camera, you can't just go out and crush it with that camera. Like, you have to learn the menus, you have to learn the settings, how to get your exposure right, how to grade things, how to get the look that you want out of it. It's not as easy as like, oh, I'm just going to grab a Lumix S5 II and go shoot a gig tomorrow. Like, don't do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, nothing new on race day, as we say in the training world.
Well, I think I say that in the camera world too, because someone will be like, "Oh, I'm just gonna grab this new camera." I'm like, "No, go practice with it first. Like, you got to make sure you're not overexposing, or you are, whatever. Learn how the autofocus system works and stuff like that." Now, when you are switching camera brands, because this gets brought up a lot, where most of the criticism comes from YouTubers switching camera. I switched to this.
For sure.
But the reality is, there's a lot of things, if you are looking to jump ship from one brand to the other, there's cost, right? Because you have to sell gear, then you have to buy gear. And if you're buying it new, you're obviously going to take a huge loss because you're selling, right? There's also the time that you have to spend in looking for the gear, doing the research, learning how to use it, getting the camera gear to work the way you want it to work, and get the image quality you want to get out of it. So it's not as easy as being like, I'm just going to use this tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think that's
you got to look at the lens ecosystem. There's a lot, CFast. Does all of your old media work? Do you have to buy new media? Do you have to buy a new computer?
Yeah, and so a lot of people ask me these questions all the time because I'm my channel, and I do a live stream every week called Camera Talk. People come and say like, should I buy this or should I buy that? And it's always like, people are like, should I buy the Canon R7 or the Sony a6700? Should I buy the, Sony a7 IV or the Canon R6 Mark II? Those are like ones that I get asked about all the time. Yeah. Or it's always C70 and R5C, whatever.
I see that one comes a lot on your channel
every week,
and it's now like a joke.
Yeah, it's a joke. Not that it's not a legitimate question, but it's just funny that everybody asks that because it's a complicated answer. But I think a lot of times people look at the camera versus the camera when you should really be thinking, like you said, about the lenses and I always say about the ecosystem in general. Like, what are the lenses that you actually need? Which camera brand do you want to invest in long term? Do they have the right media that you like? Do they have the right codecs that you like? Are there other people that you shoot with that have those cameras as well? Because you can share lenses, share bodies, share images.
Yeah.
How would you like give any advice to like people, trying to decide? But is there anything else that you'd like throw out there for people to consider?
Again, it comes down to being very fortunate that I'm in a spot where I can have different cameras for personal pleasure and work. And I know a lot of people can't. And so I would say, get the camera system that's going to allow you to get to that point as quickly as possible, right? Like, get something that's crazy reliable, that doesn't have a lot of stress, that's got the lenses that you need, and that will make work super easy for you. Unless this is not your job and you're just doing it for fun, then I would find something that just feels really good in your hand, that excites you when you look at it, because we know everything's going to take a great image. Like, how big of a lens do you want to carry? Do you want the big chonker of a zoom lens, or do you want a little itty bitty M lens that's this big, So those are the things that I think are important, and you really should probably figure out before you dive into a system.
Great. Yeah. And I can't stress enough about, like, if you are using this to make money and you need to be efficient with your time and your client's time and things like that, pick the camera that does the work for you the easiest, right?
Don't pick a brand because of the brand name. Like, don't I know my favorite photographer uses a Leica, and so I want to get a Leica. I wouldn't go that route. I've done it. Doesn't always have the best results.
Agreed. All right. What about for people? I mean, I think we're not the normal, obviously, person out there buying camera gear, because we're like, I don't even know how many brands of cameras I own right now, or lenses or whatever. But do you think it's cool to own more than one brand? Or would you like to, at least if you have multiple brands, maybe have cameras that can share lenses, like have the same mount? Like, for example, I know, Brandon, for a while you were like Canon and Red. So at least you could share like EF, RF glass. Yeah. Or I know some of your recent decisions were like, well, I have a lot of Leica stuff and L-mount glass. Should I just get a Lumix because it has L-mount? Do you think that's a good strategy if you want to own more than one brand?
I think so, because it certainly simplifies the cost. You can double up on lensing. I think that's a really smart way to go. I mean, like, really, when it comes down to it, I think like lensing is more important than the camera almost at this point now. And, you know, we just did a huge thing on the Canon R5 Mark II. And as great as that camera is, I personally wouldn't recommend it to somebody just getting into cameras, because you're going to have such a limited lens option right now. I would not go back to Canon because I don't have any Canon glass. But the idea of like an S5 an S1H Mark II really excites me, because I already have lenses for it. It's like one less thing that I have to like juggle in my brain. And so, like you, I've actually got a lot of EF glass because I can use it on all of those systems. And that makes me really happy. I'm like, great, I have like a huge shelf of now like Sigma EF, the 1.4 arts. And I just bought a dock to update them. And now they work so good on my KX, my OG, my S5 Mark II, and all of my Leicas other than the M. So I absolutely would probably, if you're going to switch systems, maybe it's probably a smart idea to stay within the same mount. Unless you like losing a ton of money. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you have money to burn, then you have money to burn. Yeah, I agree with that too.
Sure.
I think it's easy to find cameras that do that, you being the same mount. I like you too, Brandon. I know we've had this discussion a lot over the last few years, is like both of us have no problem investing in EF glass. I know it's weird because like I don't have an EF mount camera, and I probably won't anytime soon. Yeah. But it's one of the most universal. And if you're in the videography space, maybe PL lenses are probably a good option as well, because you can adapt those to most mirrorless cameras and stuff too.
Yeah.
And especially if you're not caring so much about autofocus. I mean, the autofocus does work on a lot of those Sigma lenses with the Sigma adapters with the modern cameras, because I've used those with the MC11 and MC21. I've used them on Sony cameras. I've used them on Lumix cameras. I'm actually using it right now on my Blackmagic. I'm using a Sigma lens. Of course,
and I'm using
autofocus.
the autofocus off of the KX. So on the 18 to 35. It's great.
Yeah. All right. So I guess wrapping that up, buy gear that you can make money with, that you can then go buy the fun cameras later you could like experiment with. Is that sort of your recommendation?
I would definitely try that route.
Okay.
Probably makes the most financial sense.
Now, just to maybe try to wrap this up a little bit, if you're just buying camera gear for fun, for hobby, for capturing family moments, that sort of stuff, does any of this stuff matter, or do you just like buy whatever makes you happy?
I would say just buy whatever makes you happy, knowing that you're going to probably buy something again. Like I highly doubt you're going to buy something that makes you happy and not enjoy it so much that you're going to be like, oh, cool, I want to try something else, you know?
And stick to one camera for a while. That was another thing you said. You will get better skill-wise.
I really think so. I stress this on my own camera channel. Like one focal length, not even one lens. Like stick to one focal length for like 6 months to a year. It's crazy how much better I got when I did that. Stick to black and white for a really long time. Even if you like color, it's going to open up the way you see things. And then master your camera. Stick to one camera for so long that you can no longer blame shitty photos and video on your camera. Like it's on you because you've mastered your camera. There's my advice for like not necessarily buying a camera, but owning a camera.
I like that. It's also like in the music world, like, you know, I think a lot of people when they get started, they're like, I'm just going to buy a new guitar. I'll be better, right? Like it'll sound like that guy that I really like. No, you have to learn. You can shred on any guitar if you know what you're doing. So similar idea. And sort of to wrap this up too, Brandon, of us reaching camera enlightenment. I think I'm getting closer to understanding this a little bit better as my skill set develops and now as I've had all this experience with all these other cameras. And I feel like I need less and less. I'm like, yeah, I'll just make it work with this camera for the most part. Are you feeling that way too, or are you still like, I'm gonna try everything that comes out?
No. Like for sure. Like I really have found like a bunch of cameras that I'm like, these are so good. They're so good. As long as I put them in an environment that they're gonna be good in, you know?
Yep.
There's not really much out there that I'm like, oh my gosh, other than like a whole new type of like sensor, like a big medium format sensor. That's something I haven't tried, and so I'm kind of interested that way. But yeah, man, I've done so many jobs where I could have taken the KX, and we've talked about like image quality and like this is the camera I love, but I'm like, it'll be like I'll do the job with a smaller camera and I'll be happy, and then I ended up taking smaller cameras and I was like, that was great. Like that was just less stress. So yeah, I think I'm at that point where I don't necessarily want to pare down, but I know I can get away with less. I'm not like chasing the carrot so much anymore, I think is the way I want to think about it. I've gotten to a point where the carrot is no longer that like appealing.
Yeah, and for me, I think it has to be a big jump for me to want to make that change from something that I already have. But I'm going to continue because I just am fascinated by the gear and the technology. Like I'm going to still be getting cameras into review and test and try to make decisions about whether I should upgrade or side grade or whatever to these different brands and stuff like that. So don't think like, oh, we've reached enlightenment now and like we're not buying any more cameras or trying new things. I'm still like obsessed with this stuff.
Josh definitely will. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely will. Don't worry about me. But I think for my personal stuff, like I have less than I used to have in terms of gear. I had like something like 8 cameras at one point. I have like 3 cameras or 4 cameras now, and a lot less, and so that's helpful. But as we wrap this up, Brandon, I again can't thank B&H enough for sponsoring the podcast. And as we're talking about buying gear, of course, go check out B&H and use the affiliate links down below.
Paybu card, you're gonna save tax. If you buy like a $7,000 camera, that's a buttload of money.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that next time maybe. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you real soon.
Namaste.